Following President el-Sisi's directives, Egypt sends 4 military planes with food aid to Gaza. Egypt welcomes Canada and Malta's move to recognize the state of Palestine as a historic step. And U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the main evening bulletin here on Qnews. I'm Mark Summers. Following directives from Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Egypt has dispatched 4 military transport aircraft loaded with tons of food aid to Gaza. The airdrops target areas inaccessible by land, aiming to ease the severe shortages faced by Palestinian residents amid the ongoing crisis. The initiative complements Egypt's continued land-based aid delivery and reflects Cairo's role in coordinating international efforts to support Gaza. Since the crisis began, Egypt has provided around 80% of the total humanitarian assistance entering the Strip, working closely with friendly nations to alleviate suffering. Egypt has welcomed announcements by Canada and Malta of their intention to recognize the state of Palestine, calling the move a historic step toward restoring Palestinian rights. In a statement, Cairo urged all countries yet to recognize Palestine to act swiftly, describing the growing international momentum as a decisive moment to stand on the right side of history. Medical sources have reported that 2 children died of starvation in Gaza today, bringing the total number of hunger-related deaths to 159. Of these, 90 are children. It remains unclear if the deaths include a young man reported earlier to have died from starvation in Qnews. The U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try to restart stalled Gaza ceasefire talks and address the worsening humanitarian crisis. The visit follows a breakdown in indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Doha, with disagreements over Israeli troop withdrawals. The meeting comes as international pressure mounts, with Canada joining nations pledging to recognize a Palestinian state. The United States has imposed sanctions on Palestinian Authority and PLO officials, accusing them of undermining peace efforts. The sanctions include visa bans, according to a State Department statement, which said the move serves United States national security interests. This follows earlier U.S. actions, including the closure of the Office of Palestine Affairs in March and funding cuts to PA security forces in February. Meanwhile, Portugal is considering recognizing the state of Palestine during the 80th UN General Assembly in September. Prime Minister Luís Montenegro's office said the government will consult with the President and Parliament before making a final decision. The WHO has warned Gaza faces a severe famine, with many starving and the health system collapsing due to lack of supplies. Aid shipments are blocked at the borders. The WHO urges Israel to allow immediate, unrestricted aid access, release humanitarian workers and hostages, and calls for a ceasefire. Doctors Without Borders has warned of a severe nutritional crisis in Gaza, with cases of acute malnutrition in children under 5 tripling recently. They say that they treat around 25 new severe cases daily amid ongoing Israeli attacks and a blockade. They call the situation catastrophic and unprecedented in 25 years. Basic services have collapsed, with no electricity, food or humanitarian access. A Doctors Without Borders staff member and his son were seriously injured in an Israeli strike on a church, highlighting the lack of safe places in Gaza. UNRWA spokesperson Adnan Abu Hasna has said a ceasefire is necessary to address the worsening crisis in Gaza. He noted that most newborns in Gaza are underweight due to malnutrition, and hundreds of aid trucks are needed daily. He emphasized the need for Israel to ensure safe passage for aid, which must reach UN warehouses for proper distribution. Abu Hasna also warned of rising disease risks as Gaza's desalination plants have been destroyed, leaving residents with contaminated water. As you were hearing earlier, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced Canada's intention to recognize the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September. Carney emphasized Canada's steadfast support for Israel's right to exist in peace and security, stressing that a viable Palestinian state recognizing Israel is essential for lasting peace. He highlighted the erosion of a two-state solution, and Carney called for coordinated international action to restore hope for peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. He noted the central role of the United States and Canada's commitment to partnering for peace in the region.
Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful.
However, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned that Canada's plan to recognize a Palestinian state could jeopardize ongoing trade negotiations between the two countries. Posting on his Truth Social platform, Trump said it would be very hard to finalize a trade deal with Mark Carney if Canada decides to recognize Palestine as a state at the General Assembly in September. The Trump administration has already announced its intent to impose a 35% tariff on a range of Canadian goods starting from this Friday, if a new agreement is not reached. The warning adds a sharp geopolitical twist to already tense economic talks. Israel has sharply rejected Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney's announcement to recognize a Palestinian state, calling the move a reward for Hamas. In a statement posted, Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Canadian government's shift undermines efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and to establish a framework for the release of detainees. The rejection highlights tensions between Canada's evolving Middle East policy and Israel's security concerns amid ongoing conflict. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin has stated that Russia's recognition of the state of Palestine helps preserve the possibility of a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel. He noted that Russia has maintained strong relations with Palestine since the opening of its embassy in Moscow in 1990. Vershinin emphasized that a two-state solution remains the most reliable path to peace and urged an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. highlighting ongoing discussions with international partners, including the UN. He described stopping the bloodshed in Gaza and alleviating civilian suffering as urgent priorities in advancing and achieving a lasting peace. China's ambassador to Palestine, Chen Shizhen, has voiced strong support for a two-state solution and urged an urgent ceasefire in Gaza, calling for international pressure to end the humanitarian crisis. At a press conference in Ramallah, he urged Israel to restore aid access and meet its obligations under international law. China, he said, rejects settlement expansion and any attempt to change Gaza's status by force, backing the Arab plan for Gaza's governance and the Palestinian Authority's role in both Gaza and the West Bank. Beijing also pledged continued aid, training and support for Palestinian unity and reconstruction efforts. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has called for the immediate launch of negotiations towards a two-state solution, emphasizing that recognition of a Palestinian state should come as the outcome of such a process, not the starting point. In a statement released before his trip to Israel and the Palestinian territories, Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul emphasized that the negotiated state solution is the only viable path to ensure peace, security and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. He also made clear that Germany would oppose any unilateral actions that sideline negotiations, underscoring the urgency of launching a credible peace process. Now, residents of Chongqing in China sought relief from soaring temperatures, reaching 41.5 degrees Celsius, prompting a red alert from extreme heat. Many gathered at the air-conditioned Hongyangkun subway station to escape the heat, while tourists cooled off at fountains and mist sprayers. Surface temperatures at tourist sites hit 55 Celsius. Locals described the oppressive heat and difficulty sleeping without air conditioning. Hawaii's coastlines returned to normal after tsunami warnings were lifted following the powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake near Russia's Kamchatka coast. The quake triggered waves up to 1.7 meters, that's 5.5 feet, in Hawaii. Flights out of Honolulu resumed Wednesday evening as officials confirmed no major damage. The alert was lifted after authorities monitored the situation closely. And waves up to 70 centimeters struck Easter Island's coast after a tsunami alert was triggered by a powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake off Russia's Kamchatka coast. Chile's disaster agency, Senapred, downgraded the alert to a precautionary status, advising people to stay away from the shore. Waves between 30 and 60 centimeters were recorded in Chile, while alerts were lifted for Antarctica and San Felix Island. Some northern and southern regions remained on alert as authorities continue monitoring the situation. Firefighters and emergency military units battled overnight wildfires in central Spain's Cáceres and Avila provinces, with at least 2,500 hectares scorched and evacuations underway. Shifting winds complicated containment efforts as flames devastated homes and farmland. The wave of blazes comes amid record-breaking summer heat across the Iberian Peninsula, fueling more frequent and severe wildfires in the region. Locals mourned the loss of crops and land to the relentless fires. Now, for more on the issues facing our world today, we cross across to Hella in our newsroom. Hella.
Thank you so much, Mark. For further analysis, we're joined from Beirut by the president of the Global Environment Party, Dr. Domet Kamel. Welcome to Q News. Now, Dr. Kamel, are some countries still under threat of a tsunami in the upcoming days?
This actually depends heavily in the event of, aftershocks happening. They will, if their magnitude is high, they might actually cause that. But this time, actually, this tsunami this time wasn't like before. Its height reached 4 meters, but whereas before it was double the height before. But actually now we're facing a very dangerous something. The Pacific Ring of Fire is very prone to earthquakes, but the earthquake that happened is one of the most important earthquakes out of 6.
Mm-hmm. So is it possible for countries around the world to experience earthquakes as violent as the one that recently struck Russia?
Of course, we are going to see many countries in the world that will encounter earthquakes and aftershocks in unprecedented way, and this is because of how the land is shaping right now, and because getting out large amounts of petrol from the land, and also because of the climate change, and so the countries will be affected, and the layers of the land.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see the impact of climate change on the occurrence of violent earthquakes in some countries around the world?
They are affected by the air pressure, by the planets moving, by the temperature. These all contribute to the changes. But of course, the air pressure is the main effect. And so if if the air keeps colliding on the surface of the planet, so we're facing something very dangerous with the high temperature and the rising in temperature. The earth is actually absorbing the heat, and this is actually very dangerous, and this will affect deeply.
So can these changes be confronted before they occur, and if so, how?
Yes, actually they can be prevented. So we need, early warning systems in all countries in the world, for all the natural disasters that could happen. And so we had studies and research before. Earthquakes up till today, there is no device, there is no invention that can predict an earthquake 2 minutes before. And so this actually, we need to deal with this. This is a very big natural disaster, and through studies and through research, we need to deal with this natural disaster. So we need these devices to be connected directly to the earth, and to the early warning systems to warn the civilians and the countries in case of any natural disaster.
Sir, can we expect to see unusual weather phenomena in the near future due to climate change?
of course. Yes, of course, climate change is going to directly affect the temperature. You know, we have more than 100 million and so yes, the sea and the ocean temperature is rising every day, and you know, the two poles also. There, all of these are absorbing the heat, and also, you know, there is the ice is falling with less now on the mountains and stuff. So all this will affect the temperature negatively on Earth, and it will also affect directly.
Mhm. That was Dr. Domet Kamel from Beirut. He's the president of Global Environment Party. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. Now we go back to Mark in our studio. To you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Hala El-Hamalawi, there for us in our newsroom. Now to Lebanon, and Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun has called on Hezbollah and other armed groups to hand over their weapons exclusively to the Lebanese army. Aoun stressed the need for the state to assert full control over all Lebanese territory. He highlighted the importance of Israel withdrawing to international recognized borders, the release of detainees, and securing $1 billion annually for the army over the next decade. Hezbollah, however, has resisted disarmament demands, complicating Lebanon's security landscape. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader, Naim Qassem, has firmly rejected demands for the group to disarm, saying such calls serve Israel's interests rather than Lebanon's security. Qassem criticized the U.S. for insisting on the removal of Hezbollah's missiles, drones, and other weapons, accusing American envoy Thomas Barak of advocating disarmament to benefit Israel. Iran now, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has demanded that the United States provide financial compensation for the losses Iran incurred during the 12-day Israeli war on Iran. In a statement to the British newspaper Financial Times, Araghchi emphasized that the resumption of nuclear talks is contingent on practical confidence-building measures by the United States, including guarantees that no attacks will be carried out against Iran during the negotiation period. He noted that Iran had received multiple messages from the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff during and after the war, focusing on proposals to restart dialogue on the Iranian nuclear issue. Now to Down Under, where Australia will ban children under 16 from holding accounts on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, starting from December 10th. The move reverses an earlier exemption for YouTube. Platforms that fail to take responsible steps to enforce the rule could face fines of up to $33 million, though users won't need to upload ID documents. The government says the ban aims to protect children from harmful content, addiction, and mental health risks. Messaging, gaming, education, and health apps are exempt. Australia plans to push for a global ban at the UN in September.
Platforms assume who they are, which is why I want to be clear about YouTube.
Now to the United States, the US President Donald Trump has announced a new health initiative aimed at improving digital medical records, partnering with companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, and OpenAI. The plan focuses on seamless information sharing between patients and healthcare providers and giving patients greater access to their own medical records. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services supports the initiative, emphasizing interoperability to enhance communication across the healthcare system.
Overdue for a high-tech upgrade, and that's what we're doing. The existing systems are often slow, costly, and incompatible with one another, but with today's announcement, we take a major...
Lithuania's Prime Minister, Gintautas Paluckas, has announced his resignation following pressure from a junior coalition partner. The Social Democrat leader faced calls to step down over business connections by a company owned by his sister-in-law. The junior party had threatened to leave the ruling coalition. unless Palukas resigned, prompting his decision to step aside. An F-35 fighter jet has crashed near Naval Air Station Lemoore in central California. A U.S. Navy confirmed the pilot successfully ejected and is safe, with no other personnel affected. The cause of the crash remains under investigation. Lockheed Martin, the jet's manufacturer, has made no immediate comment. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that he had approved key principles for major arms agreements with the United States. He described the agreements as large-scale and expressed hope they would be fully implemented, which he believes will strengthen both Ukraine and the U.S., along with their allies. Ukraine and the U.S. Zelensky also praised the U.S. government's efforts to pressure Russia toward peace, highlighting that sanctions and international pressure are essential in limiting Moscow's resources for the war. He mentioned ongoing preparations for further discussions with global partners aimed at strengthening Ukraine's position. Ukraine's parliament has voted unanimously to restore the independence of two key anti-corruption agencies, aiming to calm the country's most serious political crisis since the war with Russia. The bill submitted by President Zelensky passed with a 331-0 vote after growing pressure from civil society and European leaders. Protesters gathered outside Parliament demanding swift action. Cheers erupted as the vote was streamed live and the bill passed. The measure now awaits Zelensky's signature, marking a critical step in Ukraine's efforts to uphold democratic reforms and maintain Western support. Meanwhile, Russia has announced it has seized control of Chasiv Yar, a strategic town in eastern Ukraine, following almost 16 months of intense combat. The town's capture could pave the way for further advances in the Donetsk region. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces had liberated, they say, the town. Ukraine has not officially responded to the claim. Russia has launched a massive drone and missile attack on Kyiv, killing at least 8 people, including a 6-year-old boy, and injuring 88. Explosions rocked the city overnight as emergency crews searched for survivors. President Zelensky condemned the attacks, saying, "Peace without strength is impossible." Kyiv's mayor reported 9 children wounded, the highest in a single night since the war began. Chile has unveiled a new conservation initiative to protect the endangered Darwin's frog, a unique amphibian famed for its leaf-like skin and the male's rare trait of carrying tadpoles in his mouth. Led by the government's Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, the project focuses on preserving critical habitats in the southern forests of Chile and Argentina, which have been hit by fires, disease, and urbanization. The goal is to expand current frog populations and potentially discover new ones. Conservationists, including the NGO Renita de Darwin, hope the program raises public awareness and appreciation for this remarkable species first documented by Charles Darwin in 1834. And that brings us to the end of our bulletin. But just before we go, time to recap the main headlines this evening. Following President el-Sisi of Egypt's directives, Egypt sends 4 military planes with food aid to Gaza. Staying in Egypt, and Egypt welcomes Canada and Malta's move to recognize State of Palestine as a historic step. And U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff meets Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's all for this evening. But don't forget you can follow Q News on our social media platforms at QNewsEGY. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News. Have a very good evening.